if you feel or if you create this content series that is multidimensional, that is going beyond just an audio file, then you have to start to explore all of these other metrics. Which downloads you could start there. What about video views? What about LinkedIn post views? What about if you're running an ad for one of those short videos, how many ideal customers did you get that video in front of? How many video views was triggered from that ad? How many blog posts, website visitors did you get for that particular piece?
You're listening to Content Logistics, a podcast for B2B marketers where we explore the foundational and sometimes frustrating elements of content. We're talking to the experts, learning all their tips and tricks. We don't gatekeep here. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of Content Logistics. I'm your host, Bailey Gunnell. And today we're going to be talking about measuring the ROI of your podcast or really any content that isn't directly applied to sales. There are a lot of traditional metrics that people track like downloads or subscribers when it comes to a podcast. But in this episode, we really talk about why those maybe aren't the best ways to measure your success, especially in the B2B realm. So we're going to talk about some better metrics that can be used to measure your success and just kind of a different perspective on how to approach a podcast. And I'm so excited about our guest today. We have Tristan Pellegrino. He is a two-time Inc. 5000 entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of Marketers in Demand. And with that, 3 agencies that are dedicated to small, scrappy teams at B2B tech companies. He's produced hundreds of podcasts, and he is one of the smartest marketers I've ever worked with. And he's also my boss and the reason I'm able to produce this show. So let's get into it. Hey, Tristan, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you today.
Hey, Bailey. Excited to join you on Content Logistics. This is fun.
This is fun. Anyway, let's just get right into it. So traditional metrics like downloads and subscribers really, I feel like, dominate a lot of discussions around podcast ROI. But why do you feel like this is maybe a misleading metric?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question about the ROI of a podcast is a very loaded question. I think maybe the first piece of information to evaluate is what is a podcast to begin with. I mean, I'll ask you that, Bailey. Like, when I say a podcast, what do you think it is?
I think for me, it's just a way to have a great conversation. And for me, it's my content engine. Like, if no one listens to this podcast, that's totally fine. But the way that we have it built is that it's a great way to build other content from these conversations.
Well, I think that's why you do a great job for us, because you have that mentality, right? I mean, the first thing I heard words content engine that you just mentioned. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake that a lot of folks make right away with a podcast. I'll see companies all the time say, I want to start a podcast. I want to introduce another channel in our marketing layer. And so when you think about a podcast as a channel, I really think that's looking at it through the same lens that you would look at, pay-per-click advertising or display ads, or if you're doing like an outbound cold email motion and you're evaluating, how are we getting people into our funnel? If you're evaluating a podcast in those same terms and along that using that same language, I think you're already setting yourself, your team, and your organization up for failure, especially when we think about a podcast in the context of and these are the clients that you and I work with a lot, Bailey, which these are B2B tech clients, which could be SaaS, enterprise software, hardware, and even services. These sales cycles are long. So if you think about podcasts as a channel and you're getting people in the funnel, you're really going to, like I said, set yourself up for failure. So I think that's the first thing to just think about is what is a podcast to begin with. And if you get out of this notion that it's a channel, then you start to explore the ROI from a completely different angle, which is multi-dimensional, essentially. It's not just this single channel that's in place.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you there. I think, too, pulling it out of like that channel discussion really allows you to integrate it into your sales process too. I know so many marketers really struggle to connect with the C-suite and really getting connected with those people that are higher up. And a lot of the time, landing pages and that pay-per-click isn't going to get to your C-suite. But a podcast, if they can find you there and connect with you, I've found that way just really works. And it is longer. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is a really great way to connect with them.
Yeah, it's a good way to connect with people, on a one-on-one basis. And some people frown upon that too, just using like a podcast as a way to, get people into your funnel, right? I want to reach out, just have a conversation for the sake of trying to sell you something later. But if you also just think about it in a sense of building relationships with people that are prospects, for sure, that's one, but also aligning yourself as a host or as the marketer producing the podcast, but as the company aligning themselves with other industry thought leaders or colleagues in the space. You just want to show momentum in the industry and show that, hey, my organization is having these conversations out here. We care about customers. We care about what they're going through. We want to learn more. And you just really use a podcast as that feedback loop, not only from prospects and customers, but from people that you're working with, partnering with, et cetera.
Yeah. I like what you said about a feedback loop, especially. I feel like I learn so much doing this podcast because, if you're working at an organization, sometimes you're getting feedback from the same people over and over again. But when you can pull yourself out and talk to other people in your industry or out of your industry, it can really open up your perspective too and just hear what other people are saying.
Yeah, and it's a forcing function to make it happen. Like if you commit to doing a certain number of episodes, or if you set that objective up front and say, hey, I don't necessarily care about downloads or whatever. My objective is to have a certain number of conversations with these 4 types of people, which could be prospects, customers, industry influencers, or even internal subject matter experts. If you kind of pull all those people together and say, I want to have 40 conversations in 2025 with these people, that is a great objective to have. And if you're the leadership of the organization, it's like, okay, well, as a marketing team, if that's one of the things that you're doing to drive other activities, why? I'm not necessarily going to say what's the ROI of that activity because it's going to make everything better. So that's just another way to think about it as well.
Yeah, I really like that perspective. Now, maybe just turning the conversation a little, we talked about subscribers, downloads maybe aren't the best metric, but what are maybe some of those other metrics that people can use to define success?
Well, I think the other thing goes back to, when you lead with downloads or the download question, that's just naturally folks thinking about a podcast as an audio file that, is accessible through an RSS feed. And if we even explore that a little bit further, Bailey, like what is a podcast? You mentioned a content engine. We're recording on Riverside. It's a video format. If you think about a podcast, like the word also just, I don't know, when you're talking about it in the marketing sense, it doesn't even really make sense in a lot of ways. I know we use video podcasts a lot. We do content series. So we even, Bailey, when you're working with clients and when I'm talking to clients as well, try to even get away from podcast as the name that we use to call this thing, which is very much a content series, which is conversations recorded on video. And so if you think about it that way, that allows you to pull back from just downloads, which are traditionally just the audio file. But, Spotify now has video available too if you have that file accessible. But, traditionally, if you're in the car and you're playing a podcast, it's an audio file. That triggers a download, and that's what you see in your dashboards, like in Buzzsprout or, whatever other podcast hosting platform that you're using. And if your marketing team is just evaluating the number of downloads, that is just one very single piece of what a podcast does for your team and your organization. And if you're recording in video format, you really need to step out and say, okay, well, am I publishing this on YouTube as well? Am I taking a piece of the conversation and creating a short form video that accompanies a LinkedIn post from my company page? Is our CEO taking bits and pieces of conversations that we're having? Is he or she taking that short form video, creating their own post on LinkedIn, distributing from their personal LinkedIn profile, and building their thought leadership and adding their own point of view on top? Are you creating a blog post that embeds short form video? Are you creating a blog post that stems from the entire conversation, which is a written piece that is built, from a podcast episode? So like that wouldn't even exist if it didn't have that content to begin with. Are you embedding this content series that you're building within a newsletter that goes out to prospects and customers? So I think if you feel, or if you create this content series that is multidimensional, that is going beyond just an audio file, then you have to start to explore all of these other metrics, which downloads you could start there. What about video views? What about LinkedIn post views? What about if you're running an ad for one of those short videos, how many ideal customers did you get that video in front of? How many video views was triggered from that ad? How many blog posts, website visitors did you get for that particular piece? How many people watched the video on YouTube? So you're now exploring metrics that, we just went through like 8 to 10 metrics that you need to look at and really sum up to get the full impact of that single conversation that you had.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier, that a lot of times people get scared when they hear the word podcast. But if you explain to them, it's like a content program. It really is just the podcast is the first step, and then it grows beyond that to those blog posts and social content. I think a lot of people can get behind blog posts. They're like, yeah, I know I need to post stuff on my website. The podcast is just the way to get that started.
That's right. Yeah.
Recently I had someone tell me, they were like, we are trying to target this new market and we're not really sure how to do that because we don't really know what their challenges are super specifically. And we kind of talked about that, and they're like, their boss was just like, just look up on ChatGPT what their challenges are. And I was like, Oh no, that's a problem. Like, why don't you just find someone in that industry, start a conversation, and then that's going to be so much better than just looking up on ChatGPT what their challenges are.
Yeah, definitely. I think as AI becomes more prevalent and people start to turn to ChatGPT to solve or fill the gaps in a lot of ways, it's easier, right, to just type a question into a chat interface and get a response and kind of run with it. It's much harder to have that one-to-one conversation and really talk to folks on a human level. But I think that is really an exercise a marketing team has to do. Since the beginning of time, you have to talk to your customers. That's what drives just how you react as a company, how you solve their problems. Like, you have to have that knowledge baked in to what you're doing. And I believe, like, in many ways, companies can just squash the notion of ROI of a podcast altogether and say, what if we didn't even measure the ROI of a podcast? Like, what if we thought about it in maybe these 3 ways, which is how I've thought about it in a lot of ways, is what if we think about a podcast as increasing like the quality and consistency and variety of your content? So you're not even going to talk about downloads, but hey, we're going to have blog posts that go beyond written content. They're not going to have video component available, which will increase really just the quality of that page, which ultimately can impact SEO results and how people arrive on that page to begin with. What if the content series gives you the ability to create audio, written, and video format? So this reduces your risk of having just one channel as a marketing team, just a blog, right? Like a company blog with insights. Like you now have a content engine that has a lot of different formats, which you have to have these days. That is really table stakes. You can't just rely on a single medium anymore. You have to have content in a lot of different formats. Another layer that I think about it is just what you're talking about, Bailey, is like that research, customer research, connecting with people in your space. Like, what if we ignore downloads metrics altogether and just say, hey, I want to use this as a tool to just strike up these conversations. And maybe the output or the objective is to get like 50 high quality transcripts for the year. And then I say 20 of those will be prospects and customers. Another 20 is industry leaders or partners that we're working with as a company. And then maybe 10 of those is internal discussions, which is very much what we're doing here, right? We work together. We're having an internal discussion. And a lot of this conversation that we're having can be used in a lot of different ways. So that's another way to think about it. And really the third is just really developing those relationships with key target accounts. And a lot of people think about podcasts as a way to break in or initiate a conversation. But, in my career, I've pulled customers in to have conversations. So we may have even been working with a customer for 1 to 2 years, but it's like, hey, I want to now reflect on the work that we've done. So maybe that creates somewhat of a testimonial or a case study that we can explore. It also gives us an opportunity to have another conversation to maybe uncover some other needs where we can step in. So, it's not only on the front end to drive that initial engagement, it's actually enriching that relationship as well and kind of continuing that conversation. So there's some other ways to think about it. A podcast, if you just take away just metrics altogether, those are ways that it can help.
Yeah. I don't know if I've told you this, Tristan, but one of my first jobs ever, I got hired to film testimonials of someone's clients. And it was just a little job. And I ended up learning so much about this company that I got a full-time job offer by just because I learned so much just asking them questions. And because I did that first before I even started working for this company, I feel like my decisions were a lot more informed about just the marketing that we were doing. And it wasn't necessarily on a podcast. It was like a videos they wanted on their website, but a podcast can be a great place to do that, as in honestly so many different ways that you can do that.
Yeah, and I think that's why you enjoy this and you're good at it, because like that you saw the benefits of it, not even through a podcast format, right? It's just having that conversation, asking great questions. I mean, in many ways that I come from the same background, Bailey. I owned a video production company before the agencies that we have now. And I was doing a lot of like short form documentaries, corporate videos, and very much in the same way that you're talking about it. We would do a lot of case study videos and you just get in this habit of asking great questions and trying to get better at asking questions and just being curious. And I think that really fuels a great podcast strategy as well. And you're right. In those days when you were starting off in your scenario, it wasn't even a podcast. That's not even what the thing was. And same with me. A lot of documentary style videos I was creating, but it just was all built on that foundation of a one-to-one conversation.
Yeah. Well, Tristan, are there any like success stories you can think of? You've produced so many different shows, also just great content overall. Are there any examples that come to mind when you think of maybe they saw a good ROI, not necessarily in downloads, but in maybe their brand authority or in other ways?
Yeah, there are so many. I mean, we've had customers for a long time. If I look at our roster of podcast clients, I mean, there are several that are going like 3-4 years and above. I mean, there are a number of stories where, one that comes to mind where, this company was trying to really break into like high ranking government officials during COVID. And it's like, how can we get some of these folks on our podcast to align our company with current events that are going on right now? And at the time, we were producing a podcast in that space that didn't really exist. So that company had like, blue ocean territory where it's like this type of podcast, these types of conversations aren't really happening right now. So let's just get some of these high-ranking officials from the government to come on. Let's have a conversation in the context of our business, how we're helping customers. So that's one way is just seeing the alignment of a company with like really prominent industry players. And I don't think you can take that, for granted. It's like, how else are you supposed to align your company and show that you're having conversations with very prominent people? You're on the cutting edge, you're always like paving the way for customers. So that's something that comes to mind, is just really a customer that was able to get in touch with, have conversations with people in the industry that they just otherwise would not have had any reason to have this conversation. I see a lot of customers that really are building all of their content from this format that we call a podcast, which is traditionally a video podcast now for most of our clients. And that's where we're seeing them create everything. Everything really starts with that conversation. So when the sales team has a request, or marketing has a desire to create a post, maybe that is like, the priorities SEO driven, we want to generate organic traffic. It all walks back to, hey, what's the conversation we can have to really serve as the foundation for this piece that we're creating. And I think that's really a very effective way to look at the video podcast, is really that engine that's driving a lot of your activities as a marketing team.
Yeah. One common pushback I get from people that maybe aren't totally bought into the idea yet is, how am I going to get people on this show? Like, who's going to come on this show? And what have you found has been just a successful way to get people on a podcast?
Yeah, I think being very specific about the conversation that you're going to have, or why you're producing the show, I think that helps a lot. If you're just doing a broad marketing podcast and you want to talk to marketing people, it's like, that's a little difficult. Everyone's trying to do that. But if you're producing a show for small, scrappy marketing teams, and you're reaching out to someone that is on a marketing team of 1 to 5, and they're the head of content, and you want to explore how they're solving some of their team's content challenges, you can bake all that into your outreach and really be very specific to the conversation that you want to have and the value that you want to create. So I think just being very specific in outreach naturally provides better responses, because people feel like they're seen, they feel like they're understood, and it's like, hey, this person looked into my background. Maybe they saw me on another podcast episode and they want to go deeper into a topic or look at it from a different angle. That's all interesting, and you'll find that people respond better that way. And then I think just making it easy for folks. Bailey, how many times have you gone through like scheduling nightmares for, just trying to get a podcast episode recording in place? The easier you can make that to happen, and, like the less friction, the better. You just really want to get to that conversation, I think.
Yeah. I really like your point of like customizing the approach and getting really specific. We do guest booking outreach for some of our clients, and we had one of the people we reached out to this client say, I only said yes because I could tell that you looked at my LinkedIn profile. Like,
Yeah.
It didn't feel like just some generic message that got sent to hundreds of people. Like, I could tell that you looked at my profile, you could see what I'm all about, and that really helped me, or made me want to come on to your show.
Yeah. For a long time, most of the guests that I would have on, like, I've produced several podcasts at this point, and most of the guests that I've had on, they typically just start in like the comment section of LinkedIn. It's like, you have a post out there, you provide a perspective on something, and someone responds to your post in a comment. It's like, you want to go deeper, or you saw a really good thought from someone else, and you added a comment in LinkedIn, and you had a little exchange. But it's like, hey, there's only so much you can do going back and forth in the LinkedIn comment section. Yeah. So you can break away in a DM to say, hey, I produced this show. I really think it'd be helpful to go a little deeper on this topic. I'm curious about items 1, 2, and 3. I want to hear more. Are you up for coming on the show and talking about it further? So for years, that's how, like, I even got guests. There wasn't even like a really scaled out effort to do outbound, connections and trying to get folks that way. It was really just natural progression of conversations I was already having.
Yeah, that's just a really natural way to connect with people and just expand your network too.
Yeah. And it's like, if you get into that habit, which, the habit for me has gone up and down a lot, and I'm kind of like not in a rut per se, but it's like I really need to start having these conversations more. And it evolves for me. It evolves for folks in their career too. It's like, you can explore a subject or, an angle for a podcast for a certain period of time. And then sometimes you just feel like you have to do something else. Like I'm on, I think my third or fourth podcast now where, I'm just always trying something different, trying to have conversations in a different way. And I think just keeping that habit going is very helpful.
Yeah, this is my first show ever, but I imagine by the time I'm a little bit farther in my career, it'll be very different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you'll either want to explore something different altogether, or maybe look at these conversations, from a different angle or something. Because I think the first podcast I did consistently, we had like 280, 300 episodes or something.
Whoa.
And then, yeah, you just get to the point where it's like, I've had a lot of the same type of conversations. I want to do something different, change it up. And that's when, we just created a completely different show. And I think all of that is okay. A lot of that is driven just by the passion and the curiosity as a host to keep trying different things.
Yeah, that's so many episodes. You're probably the top 1% or even higher.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot. But, it really allowed us to, that might be a good success story just personally. The podcast we created was called Tech Qualified. Me and my business partner, Justin Brown, we were doing like 3 to 4 episodes almost per week. And it was a time during COVID, we had started it beforehand and like COVID came, no one's in an office. We're not in an office. Our customers aren't in the office. We still need to understand the market, what's happening. The world was completely changing in front of our eyes, and we were talking to marketers, and it was exciting. It helped really refine our positioning and messaging as an agency at the time. Motion, the podcast agency that exists now, wasn't even focused on podcasting at that time. It was more of a video production company, and we were trying to figure out how to reposition it a bit. And that show just helped us refine that and really dial it in for a specific customer segment. And we grew a lot based on that decision. That's what has allowed us to acquire other agencies and grow the Marketers in Demand collection of agencies that we have now.
Wow. COVID really changed things a lot.
It did. It certainly did. I'm a whole lot older than you, Bailey, but it was very significant even in my lifetime for sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's really crazy how, just to change things completely for the business and your offering. I think a lot of other marketers can probably relate to that with how it changed things for them as well.
Yeah, we were a very traditional video production company doing, very much like you talked about, where you're going on site with camera crew, might be recording a testimonial or just, internal documentary style videos. And you have to be on site for that. And we had already started reshaping the services that we provided, but really COVID kicked all that into a completely different gear. We had to figure out, okay, how are we going to service customers in a different way? Can't go on site anymore. What do our customers need now? How's it different? There was really no other way to get that information than to have so many of those one-to-one conversations every week.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. I think we'll just wrap up with my favorite question, Tristan. It's, what is your biggest marketing ick?
Marketing ick. When people, before they ever record an episode, before they ever have a conversation, they're wondering how many downloads they're going to get for that first episode. Since we're on the topic of podcasts, maybe I'll just do that. I have a lot of them, but we'll do that one, where it's like you're really just focused on the wrong thing. Like the downloads or the metrics for views or anything like should be so far down the list for those first, I would even say 10 episodes. Like get to 10, get above that that magical number of 7 that people typically experience pod fade. Like, just get some reps in. Then you can start to say, all right, is this working? How do we feel about it? Let's make it better. Let's distribute it more. Let's focus on more metrics. But that's probably my biggest thing there is just focusing on the right things right out of the gate with a podcast.
Yeah, I feel like that's very on the nose. The one that gets me is when people are like, I want to be the number one podcast, or like they want to be an influencer, which there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. But if you're going in with that, you're just setting yourself up for success or for failure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's like also with a B2B podcast or podcasts that are, for a specific customer, it's like, I mean, you could be number one just by existing, right out of the gates. It depends on how you frame it up. So, and even being number one, you could have 10 downloads in your first week, but is it a failure or a success? I don't know. It's just the way you look at it.
Yeah. Great. Well, Tristan, where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, the best place is on LinkedIn. I think last time I checked, Bailey, I'm the only Tristan Pellegrino on LinkedIn, I believe. So that's probably the best place. And then, I do have creative operations podcast that I'm running now and just trying to build that a little bit more. So we're having a lot of conversations around the, types of technology that we use to drive a lot of the work that we produce. Some of it is AI enabled, of course. Some things are internal tools that we're creating and, working on the infrastructure for small, scrappy teams. So creative operations is kind of my format now that I'm using as a podcast to have those conversations. So those are 2 different spots to catch me.
Yeah. Highly recommend checking out Tristan on LinkedIn and on his podcast. He shares a lot of super valuable content and really just I'll just say this about you, Tristan. You are on the verge of just so many advanced technologies, and I always learn so much every time we talk.
Well, I'm pretty old, Bailey, but I think just learning new things each and every day is just something that I'll probably always try to do. So it keeps things fun, I think. So
definitely. Well, thanks again for coming on the show today.
All right. Appreciate it, Bailey. It was fun.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Logistics. Make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss the next episode. Bye!